All right. Good morning. Thank you for meeting with me and for allowing me to record our coaching session. I want to begin just by recapping our initial conversation. I completed two drop ins in your class during the early part of last week. You recall those?
Yes.
So, based on my observations, I noticed that you could focus some deliberate attention to the ways in which you pose questions to your students. Keeping that in mind, I decided to use the question and drop in form that was provided here at our school to ask you to observe me as a sort of exemplar, and I wanted you to pay particular attention to the ways I question your students during my time teaching your lesson. So, going back to our originals, can you just speak to what you noticed from me observing you in my original documentation versus I'm gonna have to go in and edit that in. Okay. So can you speak to what you noticed from me observing me to the what am I asking?
Well, the key similarities, I think.
No, can you speak to what you noticed from observing me in regards to the questioning strategy?
One thing that you did that I have a tendency to shy away from, but yet change, is the fact that you call on deliberate students. Despite if they think you're calling on them or not, I tend to shy away from those students. And that's one thing that needs to be changed. So what you did was deliberately call on students versus what I do is kind of, as long as the question is getting answered, it shouldn't matter who answers it. So that needs to be changed. So I saw you calling deliberate students, which is something that I have decided to incorporate.
Okay, well, good. Reflecting back to the original documentation that I gathered on you, what were some of the key similarities that you noticed from observing me?
Um, you and I both tend to focus on the knowledge and comprehension questions at the beginning of the lesson. It's easier to ensure that the students can comprehend and they know what they're talking about before they can analyze what they're talking about. So when I look at my questioning versus your questioning at the beginning of the class, at the very, very beginning, our questions focus a lot on the first two levels of Bloom's.
Okay. And that was one of the key similarities.
Right.
Can you speak to what some of the key differences were that you noticed from the exemplar versus what I showed you in the documentation that I gathered on you?
Once again, that speaks back to the types of, I mean, not necessarily the type of question, but the style in, like, in which you're questioning, which was different from me. Once again, I said I kind of shy away from those kids who act like they don't want to answer versus you call those kids to let those students know that I'm looking at you and I'm looking at you as well, even though you're not saying anything. I am paying close attention to what you're saying. So I mean, to what you're thinking. So one thing that you did differently is call deliberate students versus I don't, which I need to start incorporating.
Okay. So, moving forward, now that you have taught a lesson, while keeping in mind some of the things that you pointed out for yourself that were different and some of the things that you could do differently, what were some things that you did differently today as you taught that lesson because of our around our coaching conversation?
This particular today, I start calling on students deliberately. A lot of my choir babies who sing, as I found out today, that they actually have a lot to say, even when they're not saying anything. They're very quiet while I'm talking and maybe in agreement with me. However, they really have something to say. So I called on those students today. Tammy Brown is an example. Deterio Barnes is another. Brown, excuse me, is another example who rarely say anything. But today they literally had an opinion. Even another student who rarely says anything, he had an opinion, but he didn't know how to voice that opinion. So he looked upon another student to give him that cushion, and it worked out. Another thing that I did today was allow the debate to continue. Sometimes kids can gather perspectives through other students. So I had to let that debate occur. I didn't bring it out of them. Allowed the students to bring it out of one another. So that's something that I did do differently today.
Okay. And so, based on the things that you've done differently, the strategy that you are trying to now incorporate, how do you think your students will benefit from these changes?
They know that just because you don't speak, Miss Gordon is still looking at you. I'm holding you accountable for what you are thinking, whether that makes it out of your mouth or whether it makes it on your paper. I'm going to hold you accountable. And at some point, you're going to have to tell me, you're going to have to talk to me. And I need them to feel comfortable in doing that because their opinion may can help another student.
Okay, let me ask you this, and I know this isn't a way something we discussed previously, but how do you think this will translate into the students' grades, into their progress, and into their success as you move through these standards?
Um,
The fact that now they're being held accountable, now they're they have to speak, they have an opinion, you're looking at them, you're holding them responsible. Do you think those things will translate over into the grading
I
process?
do. Because if you allow more children to talk, then that means that they're going to have more perspectives to put on your paper. And when you have a lot of perspectives to kind of articulate, then you can find a common ground as to how do I answer this question, whether I want to put what he said or want to put what she said. I have a way to answer a question versus not putting the answer at all. So I think it will trickle down into the grades eventually. It's just going to have to take a little confidence
Okay.
at the end.
And
Yeah,
we're going to build that through our questioning techniques.
right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming in. Thank you for sitting down with me and having this coaching conversation.
Sure.
I will come in, continue to support you and look for ways that we can continue to build our students up,
Okay.
just so that we can make sure they are progressing towards proficiency together.
Gotcha.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really.